What's up, podcast land? This is another episode of Caffeinated Bible Chatter. And as you can tell, if you're watching from YouTube, if you're listening, you can't tell yet. But this is another episode solo. Me and Dylan were talking today. We're probably going to try to start doing these, I guess, on a normal basis. So still have the normal episode on Fridays, the full episodes with both of us on there. But we're talking about maybe starting to add these little short ones in on Mondays, and they'll just be little 15-20 minute maybe episodes, just devotional things to start the week off with. So I think that'll be cool to do. Try to keep these. I know the last two we did where we did them solo, they were almost 40 minutes. So we're going to keep this one a lot shorter today. And one of the reasons this will be a lot shorter is because I'm recording this at the halftime of the Falcons game. So I got about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and we got to get back out there. So, all right. So for this episode, just a quick little devotional thing. We're going to look at, if you got a Bible, if you're reading along, whatever you do, or you can just listen. I'm going to read 4 or 5 verses right here in 1 Corinthians. And then we'll talk about it. So 1 Corinthians chapter 4, we'll look at these first few verses. It says, "Let a man so account of us as of the ministers of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful. But with me, it is a very small thing that I should be judged of you, or of man's judgment. Yea, I judge not mine own self. For I know nothing by myself, yet am I not hereby justified. But he that judgeth me is the Lord. Therefore judge nothing before the time until the Lord come, who both will bring to light the hidden things of darkness, and will make manifest the counsels of the hearts. And then shall every man have praise of God." All right, so that's it. Those 5 verses. And then we'll talk for like 10 minutes. So we can see right here in these first few verses that Paul has been given a stewardship over something, right? Something to teach, right? And he must be found faithful in this task or mission he's been given, right? And if you're listening right now or watching, whatever you're doing, if you've accepted Christ and you're saved, right, it's now your job to be found faithful, right? It's your job to be a good steward, right? And I would say most people today aren't thinking of being found faithful, right? You can look at how the state of our country right now, and you can tell that this country is not focused on being found faithful, right? This book. And why do we need to do this? The Lord is going to judge us, right? As we read in those last couple verses, he's going to bring to light the things of darkness, right? As we saw in verse 4 and 5. So if this word steward, right, if you look it up I looked it up in Webster's 1828, right? It says it's a minister of Christ whose duty is to dispense the gospel, right? So a steward is somebody that has been given charge of something, right? And we were talking about cruises earlier, so that's why this is coming to my mind. But a steward, right, on a cruise ship, they're given charge. They're trusted with a task, right, to take care of whatever passenger is in that room they're staying. They're responsible for the cabin, right? All the things in that cabin. They've been given stewardship of that, and it's the same for us today as Christians, right? We've been given this task, something to be found faithful of as Christians, and we should be doing it, right? So the first thing, right, as Christians, we've been given a charge, right? That's what I wrote down for number one. Number one, as Christians, we have been given a charge, right? We've been given a stewardship, something that we should be found faithful to, right? Matthew 5:6, it says, "Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled," right? We will be filled when we have a hunger and a thirst for the words of God, right? We got to fall in love with this book, right? We got to fall in love with the words of God. And like was said earlier, I would say most people today aren't falling in love with the words of God, right? Most people in this world today don't have a love for this book. We can tell that by the way things are going, right? So we got to have a hunger and a thirst for this book, right? Job 23:12. Neither have I gone back from the commandment of his lips. I have esteemed the words of his mouth more than my necessary food, right? Esteem the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. So as much as I need food to live, right? To live a life, I need his words, the words of God, this book laying in front of me right here for my spiritual life, right? I have to fall in love with the things of Christ. I have to have a real relationship with Christ if I'm going to be a good steward of this task he's given me. I got to fall in love with this book, right? I have to be in this book. I have to know what Christ is telling me to do in order to be a good steward of the task, right? If I'm not in the book, I don't know what he's telling me. I don't know how I'm going to be found faithful if I don't have a love for the words in this book, right? I can only do that if I'm reading this thing. I can only be found faithful if I'm studying this book right here in front of me. But I wanted to look at real quick is Luke chapter 12, right? There's a few verses here kind of talking about this steward, right? So Luke 12:41, it says, "Then Peter said unto him, Lord, speakest thou this parable unto us, or even to all? And the Lord said, Who then is that faithful and wise steward, whom his Lord shall make ruler over his household, to give them their portion of meat in due season? Blessed is that servant, whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Of a truth I say unto you, that he will make him ruler over all that he hath." Right? So in those first four verses, 4 or 5 verses, whatever we read, you can see that somebody is faithful and wise steward, right? There's a steward again here. Somebody is doing the things of Christ, right? He's saying they're faithful. This is somebody that has a hunger and a thirst for the things of Christ, right? A faithful and wise steward. They're obviously in this book, right? If you're saved and you're being faithful and wise, you obviously are in this book. You have to be. That's the only way you can be found faithful to the mission we've been given, to the stewardship we've been given, right? And then the next two verses, 45 and 46, it says, "But and if that servant say in his heart, My Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to beat the men servants and maidens, and to eat and drink, and to be drunken, the Lord of that servant will come in a day when he looketh not for him, at an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him in sunder, and will appoint him his portion with the unbelievers." So those first four verses we read in Luke 12, 41 through 40, 41 through 44, that's a servant, that's a steward that's found faithful and wise. And then those last two verses, the second person, you can see somebody that's ashamed, right? They said, "Oh, my Lord's delaying his coming. I'm gonna go do what I want," right? Christ hasn't come back yet. That's a picture of a Christian they got saved, right? So they're going to heaven one day, right? But what did they do after that? And that's what we're going to be judged on, right? In 1 Corinthians chapter 3. So this second person here, this person is going to be ashamed when Christ calls up the church. He calls up his bride, and like you see John in Revelation 4:1, what's the first thing he sees? The throne, right? They say, "Come up hither." First thing John sees is the throne. Well, that's the next thing on our calendar, right? If you're a Christian, you're a part of the church, the body of Christ. The next thing on your calendar is standing in front of that throne, right? And we don't want to be this second person here in Luke chapter 12 that's going to be ashamed, right? Because all they did was, yeah, they got saved, and then they're like, well, I'll do what I want to do. I'm not going to fall in love with the words of this book. I'm not going to hunger and thirst after the words of God, right? And that's that second person there. So they'll stand ashamed, right, at the judgment seat of Christ. Um, but I think so. When talking about stewards, what have we been given at, charge of as Christians, right? What should I be found faithful of as a steward of Christ, right? We're talking about being a steward, being found faithful, but being found faithful of what? Being a steward of what? What is this task we've been given? Well, the answer to that question is the Great Commission, right? If you're saved, that's what you should be doing, right? Matthew 28:18-20 tells you what that is. And Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Amen. Right. So as stewards, right, what have we been tasked with? What is our stewardship over? Well, we've been commanded to go, right? We've been commanded to evangelize, get out there and share the gospel. That's it. Be a soul winner, right? And I think we all have to ask ourselves that, as Paul tells us, examine yourself, right? I think we all have to look at ourselves and ask that question, right? Am I taking charge? Am I being a good steward of what I have been commanded to do, right? Because if I'm saying I'm saved and I'm calling myself a Christian and I'm not being a good steward of what I've been tasked with as a Christian, man, what am I doing? Right? I think we all have to examine ourselves and ask ourselves that. And I got a quote here from Hudson Taylor. I like quotes, so I'll throw this one out there. It says the Great Commission is not an option to be considered. It's a command to be obeyed. It is not simply an item on a list of suggestions. That's a good quote. Man, it's a command, right? He didn't ask us, right? So if you're sitting here listening to this right now and you're saved, right? You're a Christian, man, you've been given this task that we should be found faithful in. And that's going, evangelizing, telling others about Christ, being a soul winner, right? Even, all the way back in Genesis chapter 1, if you look at verse 27 and 28, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. Right? So God's plan from all the way back in Genesis chapter 1 was to use man, right? And that mission, even in Genesis chapter 1, was to what? Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, right? So just like we asked ourselves, or we're examining ourselves, am I being faithful to the task of going and being a soul winner? And we have to ask ourselves, am I reproducing for Christ, right? From the beginning of the Bible, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth. So today, what am I supposed to be doing? Being fruitful and multiplying, right? Multiplying. Are we bringing lost people to Christ, right? Are we going out there and sharing the gospel with others, right? And one of the biggest hindrances to that, I would say, is it has to be fear, right? Fear separates us from the will of God for our life. And that will is for you to go out and be a soul winner, right? It puts us in hiding, right? Fear makes us hide, just like Adam and Eve, right? We're talking about Genesis. Just like Adam and Eve, after they sin, what did they do? They went and hid, right? They went and hid. Why? They were fear. Because of fear and that hiding, what happened? The commission that he gave them in Genesis 1 to be fruitful and multiply, it was hindered, right? It got messed up. And it's the same for us. If I fear what man thinks of what I'm doing, if I'm fearing what man thinks, I'm not gonna share the gospel with them. That's just what it is. And what's happening? Well, that mission, what we're supposed to be found faithful of, the commission we've been given is hindered, right? We're not reproducing, we're not being fruitful and multiplying for Christ, right? We're not bringing people to Christ because of that fear, right? And Jeremiah, I always think of this when it comes to going out and doing the things of Christ. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 10, it says, "See, I have this day set thee over the nations and over the kingdoms to root out and to pull down and to destroy and to throw down and to build and to plant." Right? So maybe before you get out there and you can be found faithful, right? Maybe we have something in our lives that we need to, as it says, root out. Maybe we have something we need to pull down and destroy and to throw down. And then what are the last two words in that verse? So we can build and plant, right? Maybe you got something that's hindering you from doing that mission that you need to get out of your life, root out of your life, so then you can build and plant and be found faithful in this mission we've been given, right? And talking about fear, the fear is the biggest hindrance when it comes to doing this commission, right? There's plenty of examples of that. We're not going to read all these references because we're trying to make this short, but Gideon in Judges 6 and 7, right? He was hiding, right? God's people would have suffered if Gideon didn't come out of hiding, right? But he was hiding at first. He was scared. And then you see in 1 Samuel chapter 9 and again in 1 Samuel chapter 17 with Saul, right? God used Saul to be a deliverer for Israel. He raised Saul up for that. And when it was time for Saul to act, right, to serve, what was he doing? He was hiding, right? And same thing in that 1 Samuel 17. What was Saul and Israel doing? They were hiding from Goliath, right? They were scared, fear, until David came along, right? When God called David, he moved forward in faith, right? That's what we want to be said of us as Christians, as this stewardship we've been given, what we should be found faithful in. That's what we want to be said of us. What was said about what David did, right? How he acted. He just walked out in faith. He was a good steward. He was found faithful in what he was doing, while Israel and Saul were in hiding, right, because of fear. So we don't have to let fear get in the way of that, right? 1 Corinthians 10:11. Now all these things happen unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Look, all of those examples that we just read were written for us, right? 2 Timothy 1:3, for God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind, right? God didn't give us the spirit of fear. That fear is a spirit, right? It's called a spirit. God didn't give us that, right? That fear is the flesh, right? When we're not in this, that goes back to the beginning. When we're not in this book, when we don't have a hunger and a thirst for this book, and we're not falling in love with the words of God, man, that fear is probably going to get in the way of a lot of the things we should be doing. It's going to hinder us from being found faithful, right? Fear. But just like those examples we just read, Gideon, Saul, whoever we just said, Adam, just like them, right? God has called us in the same way. If you're sitting here listening to this and you're saved, he has called you, right, to be about his mission, to be about his business, right? He didn't call us just to get saved and that be it. Go about life, do your thing, right? It's after you're saved, now it's your job to go out and bring that message to others, right? Bring the gospel out to them. Go be a soul winner, right? So we have to ask ourselves those questions, right? Will I be a good steward of the command God has given me, right? If you're saved, you as well. Will you be a good steward of the command God has given you? And I guess lastly, you could ask, if you haven't been doing it, will you stop hiding from what God wants you to do? Right? Will we stop letting fear get in the way of what God is calling us to do? Right. So I guess the key to all of this that we're talking about right now would just be to go all in on Jesus Christ. Go all in on the things of Christ. Why? So we can be found faithful. We've been given this stewardship of a task that we need to go and do, and we need to be found faithful in that. So might as well go all in on Jesus, right? That's it. So we can choose the day to make that change, right? We can choose the day to say, hey, from this point on, I'm going to get in this book, right? From this point on, I'm going to fall in love with the words of God. I'm going to live up to the commission that He's been giving me, right? So one day when you're standing face to face with Jesus Christ at that judgment seat, He can say, hey, well done, thy good and faithful servant, right? We don't have to stand there. We talk about the judgment seat being a day of terror, right? We don't have to stand there and be ashamed. It doesn't have to be a day of terror, but it will be, right? If we got saved and we were never about His business, right? It will be a day of terror. It will be a day of standing there ashamed, right? And I'll leave you with this last verse. We're 20 minutes in. This is it. Joshua 24:15. It says, "And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom ye will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Right. So now's the time for all of us to examine ourselves, right, and understand that we've been given stewardship over something that we need to go all in on, right? And now's the time to examine yourself, like it says here. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, right? So now's the time to look at yourself and say, man, am I really going to be about His business? Am I really going to serve the Lord? Am I going to be found faithful in the task, the mission He's given me? Am I going to go all in on Jesus, right? Or am I just going to be somebody that got saved and they coasted through life until the rapture happens, or whenever your time may be, right? But we just have to understand that we've been given this mission. It's our job to go out and do it. And if we don't, based off of if we do or if we don't, that's how our judgment seat is going to go, right? The next thing on your calendar, the rapture happens, that judgment seat is next, right? So for this little devotional episode, the key is just go all in on Jesus Christ, right? That's it. Be a good steward, be found faithful of that mission He's given you. All right. Well, thanks for listening. That was a quick one, 20 minutes. It's probably the shortest one ever on this podcast. But yeah, thanks for listening. Dylan will release the next one of these. Well, we'll do our main episode on Friday like normal. So we'll both be back Friday. And then I assume Dylan will do one on Monday on his own. But like I said at the beginning, these Monday things will just be quick ones, 15, 20 minutes. And then Fridays will be the longer ones where we dive into some more crazier stuff probably. But Monday will just be devotional things. So thanks for listening. We will see you all in the next one.